For over 4 decades, the world watched Muammar Gaddafi play the role of visionary, kingmaker, and supposed protector of Libya, parading himself beside his famed Amazonian guard and basking in global adoration. But behind the spectacle lay secrets so brutal, so depraved, that even hardened investigators recoiled. What you are about to see in the savage sexual deviancy of Muammar Gaddafi is not rumor or propaganda, it is documented reality. Rape chambers beneath palaces, handpicked for systematic abuse, and women forced to become both bodyguards and victims. International teams would only begin to uncover the scale after his regime's bloody collapse. How did such monstrous crimes hide in plain sight for 42 years? The real story begins now. On August 28, 2008, more than 200 African kings, chiefs, and sultans assembled in Benghazi. Gaddafi sat atop a gilded throne, draped in embroidered robes, crowned with a golden diadem. The crowd of dignitaries, some in ostrich feathers, others in leopard skins, watched as he was declared the King of Kings of Africa. The ceremony was orchestrated with military precision, each detail designed to evoke ancient power and modern spectacle. Delegations arrived from across the continent, including 34 traditional rulers from Uganda alone. The air was thick with pageantry, gifts of an 18th century Quran, ornate scepters, and a massive chair carved from rare wood. Gaddafi, holding court beneath a white tent, called for a united Africa with a single army, currency, and passport. His speech, delivered from a makeshift throne, echoed through the gathering. He demanded that traditional leaders reclaim their influence, insisting that only he could guide Africa to greatness. Cameras flashed as he posed with his all-female Amazonian guard, their uniforms crisp, sunglasses reflecting the desert sun. The international press described the event as bizarre, but inside Libya, the message was clear. No leader on the continent commanded such loyalty or spectacle. The Forum of African Traditional Leaders was established that day, pledging annual meetings in Sirte. Yet, even as the ceremony unfolded, some chiefs quietly distanced themselves, refusing to recognize Gaddafi's new title. The scene in Benghazi marked the height of his myth, a ruler who could summon kings at will, cloak himself in the language of liberation, and command the world's attention with a single gesture. In Paris, months after the fall of Tripoli, Annick Kojan began her investigation into the secret world Gaddafi had hidden from public view. As a senior reporter for Le Monde, Kojan had covered dictatorships before, but nothing prepared her for the accounts that surfaced from Libya in late 2011. With the regime's archives suddenly unguarded, she gained access to government documents, personal correspondence, and medical records that had been sealed away for decades. These files, stamped with the insignia of the Libyan state, revealed a systematic pattern of abuse and procurement that had operated for years with official sanction. Kojan's approach went beyond the rumors that had long circulated among diplomats and exiles. She conducted dozens of interviews with survivors, former regime insiders, and international medical staff who had worked in Tripoli. Each testimony added new layers to the portrait of a regime that used sexual violence as a tool of power, protected by layers of bureaucracy and enforced silence. The details she uncovered pointed not to isolated incidents but to a machinery of exploitation, one that included standardized recruitment, medical screening, and a network of enablers operating across Libya and beyond. Her findings were first published in Le Monde in October 2011, sparking debate in France and across Europe. The following year, Kojan released her book, Gaddafi's Harem, which drew on both survivor accounts and newly opened archives. The book quickly became a reference point for journalists, human rights advocates, and legal investigators seeking to understand the true scale of the regime's crimes. International organizations, including the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, cited her work as they launched their own probes into state-enabled sexual violence. Kojan's investigation forced a reckoning with the myth of Gaddafi as a revolutionary hero. Her research documented not only the acts themselves, but the infrastructure that made them possible: procurement agents, medical staff, and security personnel who facilitated the ongoing abuse. By grounding her reporting in documents, interviews, and official records, she established a foundation of credibility that would shape the global conversation about Gaddafi's legacy. This body of evidence would soon give voice to survivors whose stories had remained hidden for decades. In 2004, Soraya was 15 years old and living with her family in Sirte. On the morning of a school celebration, she was chosen to present flowers to the visiting head of state. The ceremony took place in the schoolyard, with teachers and classmates looking on as she approached the stage. When she handed the bouquet to the leader, he placed his hand on her head and whispered something to his aides. That evening, an official car arrived at her home. 3 women in government uniforms told her parents she had been selected for a special honor. Her mother protested, but the officials insisted. Soraya was told to pack a small bag. Within hours, she was driven to a sprawling compound in Tripoli known as Bab al-Azizia. The first days in the compound blurred together. Soraya was taken to a windowless basement room, stripped of her belongings, and subjected to a medical exam by a Ukrainian nurse. She was told the tests were for her protection. The room was cold, the walls damp, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant. Guards brought her meals through a slot in the door. She heard voices in the corridor, sometimes laughter, sometimes screams. At night, the lights stayed on. She was not allowed to contact her family. Soraya's captors explained the rules. She would remain underground, leaving only when summoned. If she resisted, her family would suffer. Over the weeks that followed, she was forced to drink alcohol, watch pornography, and submit to repeated assaults. There was no privacy, no escape. The guards monitored her every move. She learned to obey quickly to avoid punishment. Occasionally, she was allowed upstairs to clean herself or change clothes, always under supervision. The other girls in the basement rarely spoke. Some had been there for months, others for years. Birthdays and holidays passed unnoticed. Letters from home were withheld or destroyed. On rare occasions, Soraya was allowed to see her mother under the watch of security agents. The visits were brief and silent. Her mother's eyes were red from crying. Soraya was instructed to smile and say she was being treated well. When the visits ended, she was led back underground. Over time, she began to lose track of the outside world. The compound became her universe, ruled by fear and routine. Soraya's ordeal lasted more than 5 years. She was 17 when she first tried to escape. The attempt failed, and her punishment was swift. Eventually, in 2009, she managed to flee during a moment of confusion among the guards. Her escape was never reported in the state press. Soraya's story, like so many others, remained hidden until the regime collapsed. For years, her name was just another file in a locked cabinet, her suffering a secret buried beneath the concrete floors of Bab al-Azizia. In classrooms across Libya, teachers received lists from the Ministry of Education with names already highlighted. Girls between 14 and 17 were marked for special opportunities, prizes, scholarships, or invitations to national events. The instructions were clear. Select the most presentable, the most obedient, the ones who stood out but never caused trouble. Administrators complied, knowing that refusal could mean dismissal or worse. In some cases, teachers were asked to deliver students directly to government offices for screening. Once selected, the process moved quickly. Official cars arrived at homes with government staff. sometimes accompanied by uniformed women from Mabrouka Sharif's office. Parents were told their daughters had been chosen for a prestigious program or to serve as youth ambassadors. The language was always formal, the paperwork stamped with state insignia. Families who protested faced threats of losing jobs, ration cards, or even arrest. Most complied out of fear, watching their daughters leave with strangers. At intake centers in Tripoli and Sirte, new arrivals underwent medical evaluations. Ukrainian nurses, hired on government contracts, performed blood tests and physical exams in sterile rooms. The screenings were justified as health precautions, but survivors later recalled invasive procedures and questions about their sexual history. Only those who passed these checks were moved forward. The rest were sent home, sometimes with warnings to remain silent. Mabrouka Sharif's operatives managed the logistics. They coordinated with school directors, arranged transportation, and kept detailed records of every girl processed through the system. Some girls were assigned to ceremonial duties, standing at parades, hosting foreign delegations, or participating in televised events. Others disappeared into compounds, their whereabouts unknown even to their families. The scale of the operation grew over time, with hundreds of minors funneled each year through this pipeline. The institutional machinery reached deep into the education system, blurring the line between state service and personal exploitation. Teachers, nurses, and bureaucrats became unwilling participants in a system that treated children as resources to be managed and delivered. For many, complicity was a matter of survival. The machinery ran on silence, paperwork, and the ever-present threat of state power. Gaddafi's Amazonian Guard stood at the center of his public image, a hand-picked force of women in pressed uniforms, sunglasses, and heels, always close by his side. Officially, the unit was called the Revolutionary Nuns. More than 40 women served at any one time, each required to swear an oath of chastity before joining. The regime claimed this vow was about loyalty and focus, but recruitment records and post-2011 testimonies tell a darker story. Candidates were chosen for their youth, unmarried status, and appearance, then subjected to medical exams by European nurses. Some were pressured through threats or blackmail involving family members. One former guard recalled being told her brother would spend his life in prison unless she agreed to serve. Training began at a military academy in Tripoli. Days started before dawn with physical drills, weapons training, and hours of ideological lectures. Guards learned to recite passages from Gaddafi's Green Book and were drilled on their duty to protect the leader above all else. But behind the discipline, a pattern of exploitation emerged. Several former guards described being summoned alone to Gaddafi's quarters, subjected to sexual assault, and then passed among his sons or senior officials. Testimonies collected by Dr. Sehem Sergewa documented a consistent trajectory: initial loyalty, followed by coercion, abuse, and eventual discard once their usefulness ended. Publicly, the guard symbolized female empowerment in Libya. International media fixated on their presence at summits and parades. Inside the regime, they were isolated, watched, and denied outside contact. The vow of chastity, presented as a mark of honor, became a tool for control, ensuring dependence on Gaddafi and severing ties to family or community. The myth of liberation masked a system where women were both protectors and victims, serving the regime's spectacle while trapped in its machinery of abuse. Forensic teams entered the main campus of Tripoli University in late August 2011. In one of the administrative wings, investigators cataloged a private suite, walls painted deep red, a mirrored ceiling, a king-sized bed, and a medical examination table bolted to the floor. The adjoining bathroom contained a jacuzzi, surgical gloves, and unopened boxes of contraceptives. cabinets held sedatives, syringes, and imported disinfectants. On a nearby shelf, they logged a stack of videotapes, many labeled only with dates and initials. Each tape was sent to a secure archive for review by international prosecutors. In the following days, search teams mapped a network of similar rooms across Tripoli and Sirte. At Baba al-Azizia, the main compound, a warren of basement chambers revealed heavy doors with electronic locks, soundproofing, and built-in restraints. Medical supply lists matched those found at the university: pregnancy tests, antibiotics, and surgical instruments. The floors were stained. In a locked office, investigators found ledgers detailing food deliveries, laundry pickups, and the rotation of guests, each entry cross-referenced by age and arrival date. Digital evidence surfaced in abandoned security offices. Forensic analysts recovered hard drives containing hundreds of hours of footage, much of it time-stamped and organized by location. Some files showed uniformed staff performing intake procedures while others documented assaults. The volume and organization of the material left little doubt about the purpose of these spaces. International legal teams described the evidence as systematic, not incidental. Proof of a machinery built to sustain abuse, protected by layers of bureaucracy and silence. In June 2011, investigators at the International Criminal Court began reviewing intercepted orders and field reports from western Libya. Files described shipments of Viagra and condoms sent with military convoys from Tripoli to the front lines around Zawiya, Misrata, and the Nafusa Mountains. Commanders received explicit instructions: use any means necessary to break the will of rebel communities. Testimonies gathered by Dr. Siham Sergua in Benghazi documented dozens of assaults, with survivors describing attacks carried out by uniformed soldiers, often in the presence of family members. Medical staff in Ajdabiya recorded injuries consistent with forced penetration and the use of enhancement drugs. Hospital records listed victims as young as 12. By July, the ICC's chief prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo, confirmed that evidence pointed to rape being used as an organized weapon. Communications intercepted by foreign intelligence agencies referenced the distribution of pharmaceuticals to boost aggression among troops. The pattern was not isolated to one city or brigade. Reports from Nalut and Garyan described similar tactics. Women targeted in reprisal raids, entire households threatened with death if they resisted. Some victims managed to escape to Tunisia, where aid workers documented their accounts and relayed them to international monitors. Diplomatic cables declassified in 2012 revealed that Western governments had received warnings about these tactics months before the regime's collapse. French and British intelligence briefed their foreign ministries on the systematic nature of the violence, but official statements remained cautious. The African Union at the time continued to call for negotiations, sidestepping mounting evidence from the field. International legal teams later argued that the failure to intervene sooner allowed the campaign to escalate, leaving thousands of survivors without protection or recourse. The files collected by the ICC would become central to later prosecutions, linking frontline atrocities to orders issued from the heart of Tripoli. On October 20, 2011, rebel fighters captured Muammar Gaddafi on the outskirts of Sirte. The convoy he was traveling in was struck by NATO airstrikes as it tried to escape the city. Gaddafi, wounded and disoriented, was pulled from a drainage pipe by Misrata militiamen. Footage from cell phones quickly made its way across the world, showing the former ruler bloodied and pleading as fighters surrounded him. Within minutes, he was dead. His body was transported to Misrata, where crowds gathered to see the man who had ruled Libya for 42 years. For many, his death brought a sense of release, but it also left questions hanging over the country. In the chaos that followed, attention shifted to those who had enabled Gaddafi's reign. Key figures like Mabrouka Sharif, the regime's chief procurer, remained unprosecuted. Sharif was last reported under house arrest in Tripoli, but no formal charges were brought against her. Other enablers, including senior security officials and medical staff complicit in the abuse networks, vanished into the confusion of post-war Libya. International investigators compiled lists of suspects, but political instability and the collapse of judicial institutions stalled any meaningful pursuit of justice. Survivors and families of victims watched as evidence piled up in abandoned compounds and government offices, but few saw their abusers held accountable. The machinery that had protected Gaddafi's crimes dissolved, yet the networks of silence and complicity persisted. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for several top officials, but many remained at large. For Libya's new authorities, the challenge of rebuilding the country eclipsed efforts to address the full scale of the past regime's abuses. Gaddafi's death closed one chapter, but the promise of justice for those who suffered under his rule remains unfulfilled. The scars left by decades of exploitation and violence linger, as survivors continue to search for answers in a landscape where many perpetrators still walk free. Over 4 decades, Muammar Gaddafi's regime maintained a public image of revolutionary leadership, while evidence now reveals a systematic apparatus of sexual violence hidden behind palace walls. Testimonies from survivors like Soraya, forensic reports on discovered rape chambers, and international investigations, including the 2011 ICC files, confirm a network of abuse involving minors, bodyguards, and political prisoners. Yet, despite the recovery of videotapes and medical inventories, many official documents remain classified, and several key enablers have never faced justice. The United Nations and NGOs continue to document the long-term trauma suffered by victims. Gaddafi's death in October 2011 ended his personal reign but did not close the chapter on accountability. Today, his crimes serve as a stark warning. Unchecked power and secrecy can conceal atrocities for years. The full truth about the scope and complicity in these crimes still awaits exposure.